I'm doing this video for someone who is struggling to get started with inner child and inner parent work. And what they have shared with me is that both of their parents passed away by the time that they were 4. And so they don't really have an example of parenting at all. The two things that he says have been difficult for him are the what is and the how to. So what is inner parent and inner child work and how to do it? What is it? I've talked about it in many videos. I talk about it in Heart Known series. The reason why this work, why I teach this work, and listen, you can do whatever it is that you want to do. This is the thing that God built in me, not as the world does it, not as the world preaches it, definitely not the way that they teach it. The way that I teach it is based on biblical principles. And the reason why God had me doing this, why he has taught me to do this, is because these are two very real components of personal accountability. There is the child who is speaking the feelings, who is that tender part of you that is in contact with what it is that he or she feels. You have to be able to identify it, and you have to be able to identify it in a way that a child does, in a raw way that where you have permission to speak it as you're feeling it. And we who have lived in the world, us adults, have not had that permission to do that. When we are upset, we start blaming other people, we rationalize, we intellectualize what it is that we feel. We have been therapized to death. And most of us who've been in therapy, you ask us how we feel, we don't even know how to say how we feel. What we're doing is intellectualizing the feelings that we have. And we end up getting stuck in a feedback loop because really God has designed us to have both of these components. He has not even designed us to be a child sitting in front of a therapist who's going to somehow reparent us or restructure our parental relationships through the therapeutic relationship, which is often taught, by the way, in graduate school to therapists. You see the delusional fruit that's coming from that field. And if you don't see it, you should. That does not work. And the reason it doesn't work is because it's idolatry. No human being is going to tell you how God set you apart, how he's building you through what he has sent in your life. You have to receive that from him. And so what I teach is for people to engage in personal accountability so that they know how to present themselves to God and receive his ministry. Now, 2 parts of personal accountability. One part has to do with tapping into that tender part of you, becoming like a child, becoming humble and teachable and expressing the truth that God has built inside of you. The other part is this inner parent that needs to be facilitating bringing out the feelings of the child, talking with yourself. I mean, these are all parts that any field should be able to tell you, yes, this is a part of self-talk. This is a part of personal relationship. These are components that are absolutely needed and are supposed to develop in everybody based on what you experienced as a child with your primary caregivers. So look, you may not have had parents, but you had some sort of a caregiver in your life. May not have been a good caregiver. You know my story. I didn't have good caregivers in my life. And none of us at this point in history have had good spiritual caregivers in our lives. That's what you are to be to that inner child. You need to witness, and then you need to shepherd. Witness first, shepherd later. Why? Because if you don't have a relationship with your child and you have not listened to them, they are not going to feel comfortable receiving any kind of suggestion or shepherding from you. So to answer what this is, it is personal relationship. Everyone has to have a personal relationship. If you've had a bad situation with your primary caregivers, it is only common sense. It's observation that people who have had negative experiences in their childhood with their primary caregivers, whether it was abuse or neglect, whatever it was, they're not going to have a good relationship with self, a good personal relationship, and it's going to be difficult for them to do things like be accountable for physically taking care of themselves, emotionally taking care of themselves, and being accountable to others, including God. Here's another reason why we do this work, because the relationship that you had with your parents or your primary caregivers, those were the first authority in your life. God is the authority in your life. So that relationship with your caregivers largely informs the relationship you're going to have with God. If you had unavailable caregivers, you're not going to feel like God is available to you. If you had caregivers who pretended like they were perfect and would never admit that they were wrong and transition your dependence to reliance on a sovereign and perfect Father, you are likely going to feel very resentful towards God. You're not going to want anything to do with him because the first people you trusted in to be who they said they were absolute hypocrites, because no one's perfect. A parent is not perfect. And actually, a big part of being a parent, a big part of that responsibility is that you teach your children that you are not God, that you model for them a parent who is imperfect by acknowledging that you're imperfect and teaching them that you need God too, and then modeling a healthy spiritual life. Now, here's another thing that I teach you often. Place your hands flat against each other in, what we would usually call a prayer position in front of your chest. This represents dependence. As you bring your hands up, I want you to bring them into a Y position over your head. As you are separating your hands, you are separating them into two things. On the left hand, you have personal responsibility, personal accountability, and on the right hand, you have relationship with God. So relationship with self and relationship with God. You absolutely have to be attuned to yourself in order to be attuned to God. Because if you're not attuned to yourself, you're not going to be personally responsible. You're just going to keep going to God in your flesh. And this is one of the biggest problems with people not being able to get into the right posture so that they can actually receive from God rather than making demands in panicked flesh all the time. You have to be accountable for being in the heart and spirit. And so you have work that you need to do in personal accountability. So this includes processing the feelings that you have about what's going on right now, and then tying that in as well to feelings that you have about things that happened in the past. You can't just say, oh, well, that was in the past, I'm going to shut the door on it. Because God has sent certain things in your life. He expects you to deal with them. He expects you to receive what he is building in you, and you need to go back. If he's raising that in you and it's affecting your life today and you're having outsized reactions to what's going on in your life today, that's not a flashback. That's not PTSD. It's not even a PTSD response. No one is required to not step on your issues. People are allowed to hurt your feelings. You need to deal with what's going on inside of you that God is raising in order to build you. If you shut the door on all of that, you are shutting the door on what God has sent in your life in order to build you. You are rejecting the ministry that God is trying to perform in you. In order to have a correct relationship with God, you absolutely must process what is yours to process. Otherwise, you're going to go to God in all your issues, and you're not going to do the work that you need to do in order to bring yourself correctly to him, bring yourself in that posture so that you can then actually receive what he wants to build in you. God does not engage us in a codependent relationship. So while you were dependent, those hands flat against each other, while you were dependent, you started out in life being dependent on your parents. Now, as you separate those hands, you develop the ability to clean yourself, feed yourself, soothe yourself, have that self-talk that was developed inside of you through relationship with your caregivers, whoever they were. If your parents passed away at an early age, you had other caregivers. I highly doubt that any 4-year-old went out and got a job and raised himself. You got to start with where you're at. Some of us are starting with some really hard stuff, but you're responsible for doing it. It's God's will that you do it, and so he's going to make it happen. You're going to need to maybe imagine children that imagine and hone what it is to take care of a child, how it is to speak to a child, how it is to try to get a child to speak, how to draw out of them what they're feeling. And you can say things from your inner parent to your inner child, such as, and how are you feeling now? And as you're talking about that, now how do you feel? The child's going to respond. Don't do it. I mean, I know that it sounds very generic. It sounds very therapy kind of, but be genuine about it. Really ask your child and sit with them and listen to how they feel. Now, as your hands are separating from that dependent position, now you are transitioning to personal accountability. Now you're able to take care of certain things God has designed you to take care of. He has not designed you to have your butt wiped the rest of your life. I'm using that example very intentionally because there are some adults who expect that in their relationships. They expect someone to take care of every single thing and they take no responsibility. On the right hand, you have relationship with God. God does not engage you in a codependent relationship. You were dependent at one point. Now that dependence has split off into reliance on God and personal accountability. On the left hand, personal accountability. On the right hand, relationship with God. Let me define relationship with God. It is reliance on Him, because if you're truly relating with God, you're relating with a sovereign God, and you need to know who He is. He does not take care of things that you're supposed to be taking care of, that He has designed you to take care of. That is codependence. If you are taking care of things that a man, woman, or child is capable of taking care of, that is codependence. God doesn't do that. That's that counterfeit covenant that is preached in counterfeit Christianity, that Jesus paid it all and you don't have to do anything. It's a lie. He doesn't engage you that way. He expects you to take care of certain things, and He expects you to bring yourself to Him correctly. He does not respond when you just put Him up on a shelf and then you go and in your flesh run to Him and say, "Lord, rescue me," or you start screaming at Him, trying to scream away the things that He's sent in your life. These are ridiculous ways of relating with God. You need to engage in personal accountability and bring yourself to Him correctly. That is the what of what you're doing in inner child and inner parent work. If you're asking me what it is that you're supposed to do, I've made it very clear in Heart Known series. So that I'm hoping that's not the question. You're just going to have to do the work, and you're going to have to pray and ask God to help you through it. How to is the next question. How to is in the book. It's a very lengthy book. I've talked about it in the book. You're just going to have to do it and pray to God that He will help you in it. I also have a workshop that I offer at 10 a.m. on Fridays, Pacific Standard Time. If you need support going through the book, you're going to have to make a way to attend that workshop. If you have specific questions after having done the work, then ask me the specific questions and I will help you. I will do a video. Do the work as best you can that's in the workbook, and then write down your specific questions. Pray to God. Ask Him for His help. If this is His work, if you have discerned that that book is from Him, that I am from Him, that this work that I teach is from Him, then you have to believe that everything that you ask in His name, which is His will, everything that you ask in His name, He will give to you. You have to believe that. That's what He says. But if you have not discerned that this is from Him, you have no business doing that book. You have no business even asking the question. You know what I mean? So I want to be clear. I'm here to shepherd. I'm here to help, but I also will not engage you in a codependent relationship. You got to open that book and do what it says. Same thing with the Bible. It does us no good if you're reading the Bible and then you're coming and saying, "I don't know what to do." Open the book and do what it says. Then you're going to understand why this is necessary. Open the book and do what it says. And if you have questions along the way, I'll be happy to answer them. But these are not specific questions. These are general questions. And I want to tell you something else, is that these are general questions that sound very panicked, that sound very fleshy. And that's the very thing that I'm talking with you about. If this is the way you're talking with me, I'm going to assume this is the way that you talk with God. And that's a very big problem, because you can't just go to God and say, "I don't understand it, and I can't do it because of these life circumstances. And tell me why, and tell me what," when you haven't even applied the work. You ask specific questions based on what I've described in the book and demonstrate that you've done your research and that you've done your due diligence, and then I can address those specific questions. The what and the how I've already addressed in the book. So if you're asking me that, I'm going to assume that you have not read the book and that you're expecting me to do something for you that you're supposed to do for yourself, including fish out or draw out whatever questions you have. That's not fair to me. And it's also not fair to God to go to Him and do that stuff. He knows what's in your heart. He knows what you need to ask. But a lot of times what I find is that people go to God and they're praying and they're asking Him certain, they're wanting certain answers, but they're not being specific about those questions that they have. Sit down and write out your questions. Sit down and write out what you know from his word, and then go to him and demonstrate that you've done your due diligence to actually study his word and present him with what you're rending your heart to. Lord, I know that your word says this, this, and this, but what about this? Can you tell me about that? I'm not seeing that in your word, and that's what I'm wondering. Be specific. Demonstrate that you have engaged in personal accountability. I want to encourage you that you will get this work. You will understand it if you are actually applying it and you are going to God and trusting him that he will answer your prayers, that he will assist you, that he will help you in whatever is in his name, whatever is his will. I testify to that. He absolutely will do that, but you have to do your part. And when you've done that, I will be here to answer whatever questions I can help you with. But you need to be specific and demonstrate that you've done your due diligence. The other thing I want to say is when you're first starting out the work, expect that there's going to be a learning curve. Expect that certain things are going to be difficult in the beginning to comprehend and to understand. Your confidence needs to be in Christ. Your confidence cannot be in me. Your confidence needs to be in Christ. If you have discerned that this is of him, that what I'm teaching is of him, then you already have some confidence in him. Now go to him and ask him to shepherd you.